Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Sometimes the best way to find a living is to stay right where you are and study with UAS online. Career-specific distance programs from the University of Alaska Southeast are the fastest way to increase your earning power.
We connect all over the world.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this Tuesday. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information at weather.gov/Alaska or call us on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. All day long, you'll find information about the rest of the weather story in Alaska at NWS Alaska on Facebook, on Twitter under NWS Alaska or NWS Fairbanks, NWS Anchorage, or NWS Juneau, and you can use the hashtag AKwxTV. Of course, in the afternoon, you get your daily afternoon map briefing. You can find that on YouTube, and later after this show, AKwx TV will be the place to find your complete broadcast of this Alaska Weather Edition, as well as any other ones you want to go back and watch just for posterity's sake. Let's take a look at what's going on around Alaska. No watches, warnings, or advisories to report, but storm warnings are in effect for Shelikof Strait and areas in the northern and western Gulf tonight. Here's the weather system, and you can see one wave of weather moving to the north and west, low pressure situated across the south and western Gulf, and another wave a little bit further out to the west. Warm front was lifting northward, and if you were in southeastern Alaska today, you probably noticed that. Temperatures today made it into the lower 60s for places like Metlakatla. Just a gorgeous and warm day. However, that means that there's warm and wet air still working northward, and after this next weather system makes it through, you'll have a chance to experience some of the wetter and cooler weather that is coming up your way across southeastern Alaska. That will be it. Here's a look at the loop again, and you can see a lot of kind of gray, low clouds across Alaska. That's the clear and cool weather north of the Alaska Range. Not seeing any clouds of any merit really to talk about, though, across the interior. It was a beautifully clear day for many in the west coast, many in south central, and certainly in the interior. You can see a few clouds working out across the YK Delta and out towards Savunga and St. Lawrence Island earlier today. Those have pretty much moved out of the lower Yukon Valley. There's still clouds working over Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula and certainly the chain all the way out towards Shemya, but by and large, most conditions across the interior today were severe clear, it looked like, by the satellite's view. So weather systems continue to move into the Gulf. There are two lows now south of the continent, and both of those have the potential of creating rainfall wherever they go. Sitting out across an Alaska Dutch Harbor, that certainly was happening today. Heavy rain reported at least for a time this afternoon, and over places like Sand Point and up through Pilot Point and Port Hayden. Rainfall on either end of Kodiak Island today. And here's our warmer air lifting northward. If you are in southern parts of southeast today, you got a taste of that. That will continue working northward, but the further north it goes, it will probably moderate toward a little bit more of a colder regime. As we look at tonight then, as that warm and wet air lifts northward, there's still a chance for some light rain across most of the panhandle. The chance for snowfall is considerably higher up, and places along the highways may see some of that. But right now, again, no watches, warnings, or advisories to go along with that. Across the western western Gulf at 968 millibars is the center of that low pressure system. And once again, it is tightening the pressure gradient across south central and southwestern Alaska. A better chance for any blowing snow to be across the middle Yukon Valley and northward, and then north of the Arctic coast out over the ice edge. And in those areas, there may also be fog. There was some lowered visibility today as a result of some of the fog across the coastline. Watch for snow showers around St. Matthew and St. Lawrence Island, and pockets of rain and snow mixing along the Bering Sea coast. A better chance for that to be mainly rain as you head out toward the Pacific side of things. For Wednesday, low pressure will move a little bit further eastward, and the barometric pressure will fill in to about 978 millibars. We're still in a steady southerly flow into southeast, and that again is where most of the activity will be for the next couple days. Rainfall and probably some stronger winds moving through. Again, nothing that's a warning level at this time. Rain and snow showers around parts of Prince William Sound on the higher terrain. Rain and snow showers across parts of the Alaska Peninsula as well. A better chance for that to mix for places like Dutch Harbor and Alaska Nikolsky. And then as you get out toward the Bering Sea coast and up the Bering Sea coast side of the Alaska Peninsula, especially into Bristol Bay, watch for occasional rain and snow showers there. Snow showers for St. Matthew and St. Lawrence. A little change for you from what you expect tonight. Pockets of blowing snow across the middle and upper Yukon Valley, as well as areas across the northern coast. A better chance for those light snow flurries and a little bit of a poor visibility from Point Barrow eastward toward Kaktovik. Elsewhere across the central and western interior, pretty dry and clear. Snow showers will be passing through in waves again. Each one of these black lines is just a wave of low pressure. It's not quite a front, doesn't have a big or sharp temperature change with it. The humidity doesn't drop significantly, but as this wave moves through, it does have the opportunity to build clouds, and sometimes that means snow showers. Anything moving through the interior right now looks pretty light as the air is really dry. In fact, about 4/10 or so may have fallen around the Fairbanks North Pole area today. It was exciting, it was snowing, but it doesn't sound like it really amounted to very much. That could happen again later this week. Low pressure working up the eastern Gulf at 987 millibars will bring some rainfall to the central and northern sections of southeast and around the north and western Gulf Coast. Light rain still possible, not a whole lot going on in Cook Inlet. And as you look out to the west, there's still a kind of a notion that there's a low pressure system trying to work its way up toward the Aleutians. If that does happen, it's going to tap into a little bit of that cooler air that's trying to sneak its way out of the Bering Sea and having trouble in the current pattern. Rain and snow showers could develop as a result of that, but still a wealth of dry air working off the continent and over the Norton Sound region, as well as Nome and the Seward Peninsula and even Kotzebue Sound. Temperatures this afternoon, as I said, were pretty warm down around Metlakatla. Temps in the lower 60s today. At 2 o'clock, we were holding in the mid to upper 50s. For Sitka, 47, 39 to about 40 degrees around the capital city. Haines and Skagway in the mid 30s to low 40s. Yakutat was 43. 30s and 40s for Prince William Sound. Valdez was one of the cooler spots at 37. 31 in Anchorage, 39 in Homer today, 21 in Talkeetna. Northward, Fairbanks was only 2, but Healy was all the way up to 32 degrees, well above that deep cold in the Tanana Valley. 18 in Eagle, 2 in Northway, 8 below for Fort Yukon. Further north around Arctic Village, only 1, but on the positive side of things, Kaktovik was 4 below, 9 below in Barrow, and 8 below in Atkasuk. Single digits around Kivalina, but once you get out toward Kotzebue, it was 14, 10 in Shishmaref, 29 around Nome, and 27 for Unalakleet, with Grayling at 18, McGrath was 11, Galena 5. Nunivak Island showed 28, Bethel was 37 degrees, and the Bristol Bay region saw temps in the mid to upper 30s, Lake Iliamna closer to 40, 42 around Dillingham, and 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. Dutch Harbor had 39, 37 in both St. Paul and St. George, lower 40s for Atka with 36 in Adak and 33 in Shemya. Now, overnight low temperatures will drop into the 30s and 40s for southeast, with Ketchikan, Craig, and Metlakatla all holding on to readings in the 40s. 43 degrees around Juneau tonight. Lower 20s for most of the Cook Inlet region. Seward about 26, 4 below for Valdez. I'm sorry, that would be Glen Allen. Glen Allen got bumped a little bit. So Glen Allen, 4 below. Valdez, don't worry, 25. 21 degrees in Talkeetna and 5 above for Fairbanks. Now, for Yukon, you're looking at 14 below, 15 below for Barrow, 16 above in Nome, and 1 above for Shishmaref. For the southwestern coast, look for teens and 20s there. Bristol Bay, you're looking at mid to upper 20s. Kodiak Island, about 37. Mid 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, and 36 in Dutch Harbor with 30 in Shemya. High temperatures tomorrow for south central will hold in the mid to upper 30s. 41 in Kodiak. Mid to upper 40s for most of southeast. Remember, that warmer air is still working your way. 50 around Ketchikan. And looking at 14 for Fairbanks tomorrow, 5 above in Fort Yukon. Nome, 23. Barrow, about 7 below. Back into Bristol Bay, mid to upper 30s there. Looks like Sandpoint will be closer to the 40-degree mark. Dutch Harbor and Unalaska 42, St. Paul 35, and Adak and Atka both close to 40 degrees with South Central in the mid to upper 30s. On to flying weather now. Southeast, you're looking at MVFR conditions mainly along the outer coast. Some of that will be sneaking into the inner channels though, and most of the Gulf Coast looking at MVFR conditions. Now, if you're flying across tomorrow, you'll probably encounter some IFR throughout the day, as well as areas along and south of Sandpoint and through the central Aleutians, but west of the Pribilofs and St. Matthew. For the northern coast and most of the coastal plain, watch for IFR conditions there due to fog and probably at times some blowing snow. Look for MVFR conditions up and down the Alcan border throughout your daytime tomorrow. AKwx Pass, VFR heading for MVFR conditions. We expect similar conditions to trend into Adigan Pass throughout the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass tomorrow look beautiful. VFR conditions there and for Rainy Pass. And we expect that for Windy Pass, we'll see a little bit of a transition toward MVFR conditions during the afternoon. Isabel Pass, we expect to see MVFR. Mentasta Pass, we expect to start your day at VFR conditions, and for Tanita Pass, look for VFR conditions throughout most of your Wednesday. Portage Pass will likely see lowered visibility and ceiling throughout the day, in the afternoon especially, and Chilkoot and White Pass holding at MVFR. Freezing levels show that warmer air is working its way into the northern Gulf as we start our day tomorrow. 4,000 to 6,000 foot freezing levels there, certainly possible across southeast, and that kind of washes out a little bit more as it rounds low pressure working into the northern Gulf throughout the day. You can see a little bit of warm air south of Kodiak Island, but some of that's also working its way into the coastal areas of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, over 2,000 foot lines there. The surface freezing line now north of St. Matthew Island. Icing potential still hit and miss, so there's more of a chance that you'll see some isolated moderate across parts of southeast tomorrow between 6,000 and 8,000 feet and above, and below 4,000 feet for areas around Northway, Delta Junction, and out toward Whitehorse and northward. Out across the western part of the Bering, above 4,000 feet there. Most of that, again, also hit and miss, light to isolated moderate. Our jet stream shows a ridge of high pressure out across the Chukchi seacoast and northward. Because of that, it's taking that warm air and working it further and further north in toward the pole. With low pressure around Arctic Village, you can see a fast-moving river of air there working from 60 knots and then quickly speeding up as it runs into that cold air descending across most of North America, and those speeds reaching 125 knots. The main conveyor belt of our weather right now, and the part that's really affecting Alaska, is the jet stream that's located out across the North Pacific. Wind speeds there from 110 to as high as 170 knots. Steering weather mainly away from most of Alaska. So right now, again, very little has changed from our weather pattern from when we were last talking last week and anything that Mr. Dave would have said last night. Now at 9,000 feet, you can see low pressure across the central Gulf. Wind speeds out across the eastern Gulf between 50 and 55 knots, racing that weather northward from south to north. Wind speeds slow down as they get into the interior, but you'll notice more of a northeasterly orientation on the western parts of the Brooks Range out toward the Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound. Those wind speeds around 20 to 30 knots. And you're looking at the central and eastern Aleutians with wind speeds coming in from the east and northeast about 20 to 35 knots. At 3,000 feet, a broader easterly flow across the Gulf. Low pressure still sending in stronger winds at about 50 knots or so, coming over the central parts of southeast around 45 knots. Easterlies over the Alaska Range at 25 knots. And for most of the Yukon Valley, it's an east and northeasterly flow at 15 to 30. The northern coast looking at wind speeds from 10 to as high as 30 knots just north of Point Barrow. Those two coming in from the east. Turbulence potential then mainly below 4,000 feet across the Brooks Range, hit and miss, and that could affect some of the passes there like AKwx and Adigan Pass. And out across the lower Yukon below 4,000 feet, there's an opportunity around the Killbucks and south and east that you'll run into some occasional moderate. Some of that for the Aleutian Range all the way out towards Sandpoint, False Pass, and Cold Bay, and over Kodiak Island tomorrow as well. For Prince William Sound, hit and miss, isolated moderate, a better chance for moderate over the Chugach Range, and then for south and east, as the frontal system's working through below 4,000 feet, watch for occasional moderate, especially in the inner channels and along the outer coast. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with the rest of your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Coming up on Destination Tomorrow, a unique ballistic parachute system might help pilots and passengers potentially survive a catastrophic accident. And we visit the Andøya rocket range in Andenes, Norway, to find out how NASA is investigating the Northern Lights. Plus, we'll take a look back at how NASA research helped change the shape of America's air superiority in World War II. And Johnny Alonso finds out how air traffic controllers keep a watchful eye on our skies at all times. All this and more next on Destination Tomorrow.
Hello everyone, I'm Steele McGonigal.
And I'm Kara O'Brien, and welcome to Destination Tomorrow.
This program will uncover how past, present, and future research is creating today's knowledge to answer the questions and solve the challenges of tomorrow.
The Northern Lights are a celestial phenomenon that have amazed people for centuries. The scientific name for the phenomena is Aurora Borealis, which is Latin and translates into the red dawn of the north. Although they are incredible to watch, the particles that make up the auroras are actually a type of electricity that can cause electrical surges and disrupt satellite operations in space and communications here on Earth.
To better understand these problems, NASA has been working with researchers and engineers at the Andøya rocket range in Andenes, Norway. Sophisticated rockets are launched into the atmosphere to collect valuable data that might explain the secrets of the auroras.
Jennifer Pulley spoke with Dr. Sten Odenwald at the Andøya rocket range in Andenes, Norway to find out more. The Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights, is one of the most beautiful, natural occurring phenomena known to man. These shimmering currents of light, which are normally seen near the Arctic Circle, have intrigued and inspired observers for thousands of years. Until the late 19th century, many still believed that the Northern Lights were driven by supernatural means, rather than by natural means. Although these old beliefs are intriguing, we now know that the auroras are actually caused by energized particles colliding with the Earth's magnetosphere. Until recently, the auroras had little direct impact on life here on Earth. But with almost every person on the planet now relying on satellites and electricity as part of their daily lives, the need to understand auroral activity has increased. This is because those same particles that collide with the magnetosphere to create the Northern Lights can also severely damage important satellites and cause outages in electrical power grids around the world. In an effort to better understand these events, NASA is using innovative technologies to learn more about the Northern Lights and how they affect us here on Earth. I spoke with NASA Goddard's Dr. Sten Odenwald here at the Andøya rocket range in Andenes, Norway, to find out more.
It's a very complicated process that leads to an aurora. Once you see it, the whole process is sort of hidden from view. You know, we understand a little bit about how the particles get from the outer parts of the magnetic field of the Earth and into the atmosphere, but we don't see the details, you know, how the particles go from one kind of a system into another, how they get boosted in energy. Even at this late stage, we don't exactly know what the particles are that produce the aurora. Tracking them from where they're produced and where they're energized all the way down to the atmosphere is still something of a mystery. And that's why we have satellite and rocket experiments that are trying to fill in those missing pieces of the puzzle.
To understand why it is important to study the Northern Lights, we must first understand how they work. The sun is constantly emitting streams of electrically charged particles in all directions.
This stream of charged particles is called the solar wind. Since the sun is 93 million miles away, it takes about 3 days for the particles to reach Earth. As the solar winds flow by the Earth, it causes a disturbance in the Earth's magnetosphere. This disturbance energizes currents of particles which are steered by magnetic forces towards the Earth's poles. These energized particles collide with oxygen and nitrogen atoms in our atmosphere, which produce the colorful light that we see in the aurora. Although beautiful to watch, these currents of particles are actually a form of electricity which can generate up to 800 gigawatts of electrical power. This electrical energy flowing in the upper atmosphere can cause currents to flow in the ground, producing disruptions in communication, electrical outages, and fuel leaks. The high-energy particles flowing in space that often accompany these storms can also hit satellites, damaging their sensitive electronics and creating false commands. This can wreak havoc on television, pager, and other communication services here on Earth. NASA researchers hope to find new ways to predict not only when these storms will hit Earth, but also hope to find ways to reduce their destructive effects when they do.
What are some of the tools you use to study the northern lights?
We have satellites that seem to be able to look at everything that goes on with a solar storm and the production of aurora, literally from cradle to grave. We have satellites that watch the solar surface for the big leaps of matter and energy. We've got satellites that look at the wind in between the planets to watch what that's doing. We also have satellites that are in tighter orbits to the Earth so that they can look at the poles of the Earth and see the aurora happen. They can also measure electric fields in space and magnetic fields in space. So they can also see the invisible flows of particles around the Earth. And then finally, we have rockets that go up into the aurora from the bottom at the same time that the satellites are passing overhead. So we can kind of see the physics in between, flows of particles inwards, and the rockets see the electrical fields that are set up by these things. And we get this complete picture from rockets and satellite observations.
So why is Norway such a popular place to study the northern lights?
It turns out that Norway is in a place that's very favorably located to actually see the aurora directly overhead. So you can launch the rockets directly up very quickly to get into the aurora at the time that they're changing.
Dr. Odenwald, how do you think NASA research is helping us better understand the aurora and its impact on Earth?
Well, NASA's invested an awful lot of time and effort into providing scientists with the technology and equipment they need to really make powerful and insightful discoveries about how aurora work. And that feeds into our knowledge of the environment that we live in space and how that affects human technology, our billions of dollars of satellites that we have there, the health of astronauts because of the energetic particles. It all works together. And if we can deeply understand space weather effects with the help of NASA technology, it's going to be much easier for us to operate in space, and that's the direction that we want to go as a civilization.
Auroras occur around both the northern and southern geomagnetic poles. While the northern lights are known as the aurora borealis, the southern lights are referred to as the aurora australis.
And on clear nights like we should have again tonight over the interior, it should be a wonderful night to view any chance of aurora that's out there. Here's a look at the ice edge, and you'll notice over the last few days now, the ice has filled in a little bit more. Gone are those wide polynyas that we saw across the Yukon Delta. There's still one between the Etoll and Strait all the way out toward the Kuskokwim Bay, but even that's probably going to fill in more as we get into that straight and northeasterly flow. The ice edge is still north of St. Matthew and is pretty much not found anywhere close to Bristol Bay. We do have a little bit of coastal ice there south of Dillingham and around just almost toward Naknek. And then across the northern parts of Cook Inlet, a little bit of low concentration ice there north of Calgan Island, even north of the mouth of the Kenai. Now, here's a look at the forecast for southeastern Alaska. Northerlies inside of Lynn Canal, 10 knots with 2-foot seas there. Southeasterlies, though, still going not quite as strong as what we saw across southern parts of southeast earlier this week. 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. Southeasterlies moving along the outer coast, 25 to 30 knots there. Across Thursday, southerlies working through the central and northern interchannels, 15 knots with the 3-foot sea. Southeasterlies running around 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. And along the outer coast, 30 to 35 knots there. With 16 to 17-foot seas in most areas. For south central, look for a north and easterly flow coming down Cook Inlet, 20 to as high as 40 knots as you get west of the Kamishak Bay area and west of the Barrens at 40 knots with a 14-foot sea. Storm warnings still in effect for Shelikof Strait tomorrow, 50 knots with a 20-foot sea. 40 knots on the other side of Kodiak Island with a 21-foot sea, 35 knots for most of the north and western Gulf, and 20 knots inside of Prince William Sound. That picks up to 30 knots from the east on Thursday, with east and southeasterlies still going strong across the north and western Gulf. And northeasterlies come down Cook Inlet at 20 to 25, but run into a wall of wind coming in at 30 knots from areas west of the Barrens. The 10-foot sea there. Seas also diminished to about 8 feet inside of Shelikof Strait for Thursday. For Wednesday, across southwestern Alaska, 35 knots on the Bering Sea coast, 40 knots for the Pacific coast with 24-foot seas there. By Thursday, look for winds to diminish even more. 15 to 20 across Bristol Bay and all the way down toward Cold Bay, a 15 to 20 knot wind there across the Pacific coast with a 10-foot sea on Thursday. For the central and eastern Aleutians, look for 10 to 15 knots there as you get west of Nikolsky, but winds will stay up a little bit more around Unalaska to Nikolsky on north and southern sides with a 10 to 15-foot sea on either side. Northerlies from Kiska to Attu at 20 knots with a 9-foot sea, and Those will become northeasterly with time on Thursday with an 8-foot sea. Winds still light and variable south of Adak to Atka, and northeasterlies north of Unalaska to Nikolsky. Across areas on Wednesday on the west coast, look for an easterly flow across St. Lawrence Island. Northeasterlies 25 to 35 into the Kuskokwim Bay area, 9 to 10 foot seas across the southern Bering. And as we get into Thursday, an easterly flow there across St. Lawrence Island. Northeasterlies around St. Matthew, 30 knots with a 9-foot sea, and winds still blowing from the north and east around 25 knots with an 8-foot sea there. Similar conditions, but lower seas around the Kuskokwim Bay region for Thursday afternoon. Across the north coast, easterlies working across at 20 to 25 over the ice. We'll see a little bit more of a northeasterly turn there from Cape Lisburne to Point Hope. Northeasterlies at 25 over areas outside of Kotzebue Sound. Similar conditions there for Thursday. A little bit more of a northeasterly flow from Point Barrow all the way down toward Cape Lisburne at 20 to 25. And 25-knot winds working across the Beaufort Seacoast as we come in from the east on Thursday afternoon. Let's look at your marine weather. Here's a recap of the surface conditions again expected tonight, tomorrow, and Thursday. Light areas of rain across southeast as a wave of weather is working through right now. That's what brought you nice warm conditions around Metlakatla and Ketchikan and areas in southern sections of southeast. That warmth is spreading northward tonight, but with it comes a better chance for some light rainfall and high elevation snow. Look for the wind and rain to come in across Prince William Sound and north and western parts of the Gulf. Storm force winds around Kodiak Island tonight, especially in Shelikof Strait. That will continue as we head into tomorrow. Generally clear skies tonight and tomorrow for the middle and lower Yukon valleys, as well as Norton Sound and Kotzebue Sound. Clouds fill in a little bit more across the Alcan border, and look for some light areas of snow and poor visibility at times across the coastal plain from Point Barrow, especially out toward Kaktovik. Snow showers for St. Matthew and St. Lawrence Island. Rain and snow showers for the Alaska Peninsula and into parts of Bristol Bay with low pressure systems generally across the central Gulf and to the west and south of Kodiak Island. For Thursday, you can see another wave of weather is trying to work its way northward out of the North Pacific. The main concentration for active weather, though, will continue to be in southeastern Alaska, where another wave will focus on your outer coast at 987 millibars for Thursday, and another circulation in the western Gulf at 982 will bring more rain to coastal parts of the Gulf. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.